I've got something, Joe, whenever Mark's done.
Sorry, yeah, my internet's a bit iffy, so sorry, Mark, can you say it again?
Sure. So I think I know where you're going with this, but can you tell me how you arrived at that conclusion? Because I'm not sure you're wrong. So I'm just trying to figure out what led you there.
So first, I thought, okay, so with the traditional meta, you're just sort of, you're radiating compassion towards people. So it seemed like you were actively trying to cultivate the perspective of a compassionate person and thereby the virtue of compassion. And so, but then John's idea of meta seems to be like that's sort of like a indirect way of cultivating something else, which is understanding that your co-identifications, like with others, are not like fixed, and there's always more to people than it appears. And then, like recently, I looked into what exactly he meant by reverence, and that basically is what reverence is. It seems to be that you're because obviously awe, it's about relating properly to awe, which is like it's got something to do with curiosity, going beyond, the common, like your own understanding of things, remaining aware that the like reality always exceeds you, and it's always drawing you beyond, your conceptions. And so if meta is about trying to remind yourself that the way you're co-identifying, isn't all there is, and therefore to create more, I'd call it participatory flexibility, then it seems like you are basically cultivating reverence.
Okay. So I'd love to hear what Ben has to say about this, but my understanding of meta is that it was always doing those things, or always supposed to. And maybe John's emphasis is a little bit different, but I would say that reverence is an emergence from meta with moreness and suchness or something as the additional focus. So a lot of the ecologies overlap, and there's a perspectival overlap here with others. Everything has a perspectival aspect, which I think is primary, actually, for lots of reasons. I don't think John would disagree with that. And then there's a bunch of stuff that's participatory, to your point, and then there's a bunch of stuff that's about reciprocal opening, and that's the moreness versus the suchness. So the suchness is the grounding, and the moreness is the opening to new potential or possibility. And then the reason why he does that is to do that opponent processing.
Did you stop talking, or have I lost connection?
He stopped
talking. I think he stopped.
Okay. So sorry, what was the main thrust of that? Because it sounded just like a yes, basically. And yeah, I'm curious to hear what Ben thinks.
Yeah.
So, well, Velosky, what I was going to ask you if your sense of this is consistent with your practice of meta, or how that's showing up for you in your life.
It's sort of a baby idea. Like I've been doing meta the whole may you be happy, well, and free of suffering so far. And so but I've been thinking about changing to the moreness suchness thing. And so, but it sort of seemed a bit like, what? So I was just playing around with the whole maybe it is literally just the cultivation of reverence, and then that would connect me more.
So I'm wondering, do you have a sense of awe at times in your life that you can recollect?
I would say so.
Okay. And do you have a sense of whether or not you're relating to those in a way that you would deem to be reverent?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Because then we could check phenomenologically, experientially, does meta seem to relate to that, right? Maybe.
Can I jump in?
You always can.
I get where you're going, I think, Voloskin, and I like it too, because I think the direction of what you're talking about is like a reverential attitude towards other people. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, and although I think John has said that you can actually perform meta on non-human things, right?
Yeah. I like that in terms of, I suppose, recognizing the sacred in other people, and by extension recognizing the sacred in the world. That's good. That needs to be done reverently. So not to take anything away from that, but to try and make something a little bit more current. I think the last time I heard him talk about it, John, that is, was in the Cultivating Wisdom Stoicism piece. Did you catch that one?
Could you give me a bit more info? What you're talking
You know
about?
how nowadays he's doing, instead of like a daily sit with everybody in the Sangha, he's doing like a Saturday teaching instead?
No, I haven't caught up to it yet.
I'll just inject this as another thread rather than as any kind of yes or no. He put metta in the context of the confusion between having mode and being mode. As I say, this isn't to say yes or no to where you're going with it, but just to put a new thread. Maybe it won't go anywhere. So using metta as a psychotechnology to, what did he say? Metta contemplation is the way to fix the confusion.
That seems to fit, because I've thought of the having mode as being a rigidity of perspectival and participatory knowing. It's where you kind of assume it, and then you leave it static, and then you get on, and then you are a little bit more, say, creative with your propositional and your procedural. Like you assume, it's sort of like you're assuming that what you value and the way that you're looking at things is right. You don't really reflect in it anymore, and you're just achieving the goal. Whereas I sort of think as the being mode as the opposite.
Yeah, I think all that's correct. Airports are loud, by the way, so sorry about that. I think regular meta does this, right? But what John does is add in the concept of the opponent processing with the moreness and the suchness, and detach the rooting versus the expansion. So you see this, for example, in the practice, the seated moving practice, and then the chakra expansion lesson that he does in meditation. So he kind of emphasizes this idea of going from rooted to expanding. And that's not only opponent processing, but it's also the flexibility, and it's also opening you up for the possibility of reverence. So I don't think they're training reverence, but opening the possibility.
Also, earlier there was discussion of the word curiosity, and a word adjacent to that that's been interesting in similar conversations is wonder, as the, like, curiosity is the seeking of the next proposition, whereas wonder is like the participatory analogy of that, of like seeking how the mystery will unfold next. So that might be useful language.
You might have to come again there, Jarvis. I didn't hear any of that.
Oh, I'm sorry. How do I send now?
That came through.
Okay. It's just the word wonder, which, like, when making the distinction between, like, taking the participatory to be fixed and seeking more in the propositional, I've heard that be described as curiosity, in contrast to wonder, which is seeking more in the
It's
unfolding.
dropping out again, mate.
I don't know.
Sorry. I think that's you, Jules, not because I'm hearing him fine at the moment.
Okay, I'll drop out and come back.
Gosh. Yeah, well, I guess I got my point across. Is that all good?
Yeah, that sounds right to me. Yeah, it's sort of, maybe I'm getting a bit too off on a tangent. I've been thinking there's sort of this idea that maybe there is a virtue. There's like two versions of each virtue. There's one that's sort of, maybe we could say epistemic, and then there's one that's ethical. So you might say curiosity, the pair of curiosity and wonder. They're sort of doing the same thing, but curiosity is more about gaining propositions and procedures, I suppose, and the other's about gaining perspectives and participatory affordances. And then maybe you could replicate that to other things, like I wouldn't know what word to use, but like doubt and something to go along with curiosity.
Confusion.
I'd be interested where humility fits into that as well.
That might be it. No. It's definitely very relevant though, because like the wonder promotes humility because it's a recognition that you are insufficient, that you're not complete. But that goes both for there is more that I can, should we say, gain, but it also goes for maybe what I got now is wrong.
I also like thinking about it in terms of humility. Experientially, when I experience curiosity, it's kind of from a egotistic, proud standpoint of, oh, let me examine this and so I can control it and understand it. Whereas the wonders, and maybe this is where reverence comes in too, is a stronger sense of humility and respect that comes from that.
Yeah, I don't think you can directly train wonder or reverence. I think they're second order effects, right? And then the way you engender them is by increasing your perspectival flexibility and focusing on opening up, right? And the opening up will take care of the humility automatically. So this is just one of those overlapping things because this theme is elsewhere in John's ecology, and he talks about it in the meditation series. So the prajna is very much like this too, where you're like, when you get to prajna, it's like, whoa, what are you actually doing here? I mean, I can't even do the prajna. But I don't think there's anything like I said, in the current meditation tradition, that metta doesn't already enable that. I think that John's maybe emphasizing it more, but like I don't, Ben would be the only one that could answer something like that if some of the traditions maybe emphasize the whole humility and reverence side of things. But it's not a direct effect, right? It's more like if you're lucky, you'll get reverence. If you do this, maybe, that sort of thing.
I think I can kind of see your point about it. It's hard to teach someone humility, but I think I want to push back a little bit on the idea that you can't try to cultivate it maybe after the fact, after you've experienced it and have come to value humility and reverence and wonder, that you can't try to cultivate that. I think I've had mixed success in my attempts, personally.
Yeah, actually, I think I was saying the opposite. I like the word cultivate. I like how you picked up on that. Yeah, right. So you're putting forth a field with the appropriate seeds and soil and water, cultivate reverence. That doesn't mean that you're going to get it, right? It just means that you're more likely to get it if you invite it in, or if you invite these other things in that are close to reverence. And that, I think, is what John's going after. I think John's very humble in what can be achieved, etc. But metta, I've always seen that as engendering the sorts of things that will increase awe, wonder, and reverence over time anyway. And it really is just a difference between a duck for John. He's just emphasizing that one piece. And he does this with Vipassana and mindfulness too, right? He changes them just slightly or focuses them in a different way than say from normal, because he's after a very specific goal. But I think those things are all the things he's trying to cultivate are things like that, right? I think his main thrust is to cultivate virtue or something, right? Or things that are like virtues.
Yeah, this reminds me of something actually. So the way, you know how it's often said that the academics, like the more you know you don't know or whatever. I think like that comes from the fact that each time you learn something, you're witnessing directly the insufficiency of your own, knowledge set or whatever. And so I can see why, like, I'm connecting this to how you say you can't like deliberately like teach or get wonder, but you have to cultivate it by repeatedly like going through some level of transformation in the first place, so you can directly witness, you're directly witnessing how there is more to reality. You're seeing how you can go beyond, rather than being told.
For some reason, when you're talking, Voloskin, there's a verse in Proverbs which is coming to my mind, which is, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." That's not to be evangelical, but rather to point to what you're talking about, which is first having a transformative experience which leads you into that wonder, and recognition of your own relative ignorance compared to the ocean of wisdom, if you're looking in that right lens, in that transformed lens.
I also feel the cultivation versus directly seeking lines up with the modal confusion. That rather than try to have wonder, you try to have corrupt, you try to be open or be a field that can support a crop. So that lines up for me.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of this goes back to my thesis about meditation being about second order effects, right? And if that's true, then what you're doing is cultivating the field and hoping that something germinates there or something like that. And in which case, for anything you think that might be the case, I agree. But if you're going to make the statement that if you meditate, you'll get X, then I'm going to disagree. For most things, like about the only thing meditation can give you directly that you can measure is something like a slower heart rate, and even that's not 100%. So yeah, there are still issues. Like your oxygenation levels go up, your heart rate modulates. We'll say there's a couple of other things. Your brainwave state changes, right? And then that engenders a long-lasting effect across those three axes, we'll say. But other than that, it's not clear to me what else it would give you that's a first order effect, we'll say.
I really like the Zen thing I always heard, which is enlightenment is an accident. Meditation makes you accident prone.
Oh, I love that. I'm all in. Yeah, I like the word cultivate. I think we should adopt that. I think that was a really salient use of the term in just the right way, right? Because cultivation doesn't mean success, right? It just means you're setting up the conditions, and I think that's really where it's at. I think that's what John's going for ultimately.
Yeah, I'm with that. Feel free to add to this one or change the subject.
Going back to what Ben said for Loskin, the phenomenology of it, what led you to that insight?
Sorry, do you mean the insight?
Your original realization, metta is cultivating reverence.
Don't know if I could explain any more about what led me to the notion. Maybe you weren't here when I said. It was just basically. So I've been on this idea of contemplations where we are trying to cultivate virtues specifically. So I had this. I had this idea of, let's take three virtues. I had what I call compassion, which is, seeing others as valuable like yourself. Prudence, which is seeing your future self like your present self. And then enkrateia, which is just general sort of not being immediate impression. So the idea would be that, say, with compassion, you put yourself in the you're sitting down specifically to contemplate the mind, the perspective of someone who, genuinely just values compassion. And by doing that, you are sort of practicing to be compassionate in everyday life. And so that was just sort of in my head. And then I was also trying to wrap my head around metta properly, because it just seemed like my idea of cultivating compassion. But then John's talking about suchness and moreness, which didn't make too much sense. And then I had the problem of faith versus reverence. And then when it was said that reverence is a forgotten virtue, it just sort of clicked that maybe. And then I obviously hear the description of it. It just seemed to sound a lot like what people were supposed to be doing in metta.
That's helpful.
Wait, so it was listening to the Woodruff podcast that you made that connection?
Yes, I think that was mainly what did it.
Oh, what part of it led you to that?
I'm afraid I don't have a good enough memory for details to tell you.
Okay.
I just remember that that's a big one. But yeah, like the meta that John has described so far, I'm now at episode 50 of the meditation series. That what he seems to have described is basically what I said about, like, you're taking a virtue and you're putting yourself in the mind of the one who has the virtue. And it sounds like that's sort of what you're doing in metta, like you're trying to put yourself in the mind of the person who is reverent.
I had a slightly different take on meta, if I could share that. Are you still picking me up? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, good. So my recollection of it, if you've only done it recently, then you're closer to the event than I am, to be honest. But my experience of metta was you're projecting from within yourself toward initially others and then expanding, I think, somewhat like Mark said previously, expanding that out more broadly. So my experience of it was just thinking about my son, for example, and looking at what's specifically special about him, then looking more broadly, what's amazing about him just as a creature, as a human, moving on to my wife, moving on to other family members, etc., etc. My experience wasn't necessarily, what would you say, mind as such. More witnessing them without getting too over the top about it.
Sorry, whatting them? Sorry, I didn't hear the verb.
My felt experience of it was that I was witnessing them.
Yeah, I like that witnessing. I think that's good. I don't know, Velaskin, where you're getting the entering the mind of somebody with reverence. I don't even know if that's like somebody can model reverence for you, right? And you can accept and reject it. But I'm not sure how you would do it imaginally.
That sounds like deity yoga or Hira meditation to me. Most directly. So in Buddhist Tantra, you might visualize a bodhisattva and arise as that bodhisattva imaginally, right? And that would be putting yourself in the perspective of an enlightened being. That's the most direct correspondent of that I'm aware of. I'll send you a piece on that just to clarify.
Cool.
Yeah, I like you invoke Tantra there. That's definitely where I was going. In Tantra, you would definitely do that, right? This is that idea that I have that the Eastern spiritual traditions are half theist, because sometimes you're supposed to embody or interact with something like a deity, right? Even though if you see him in the road, you're supposed to run him over. You're still supposed to have that idea that sometimes you're supposed to mirror that, right? That's supposed to be your ideal sometimes. It's just not, you're not supposed to follow that ideal exclusively, and that's what it makes it sort of half theist. So yeah, in Tantra, I definitely see that. I don't see that so much in John's stuff because, again, I think he's going for, I think the two things he's going for most in the modifications he's making, we'll say, to what I understand the traditions to be, and that's a poor understanding, is he's trying to engender something that he thinks might be reciprocal opening, and I think he's right about that. And he's also trying to engender opponent processing, right? Prajna is all opponent processing. So when he makes modifications, those are the two types of things I think he's modifying the current traditions to sort of engender, we'll say. I think that's true, but there's definitely sort of that idea of embodiment in the Eastern spiritual traditions. It's also, possible. But I don't think John's after those in particular, although maybe he should be. Maybe we can expand the ecology that way.
I could imagine, though, that there's a functional way in which, like, even if you're not overtly setting out to take on the mind of a reverent person, it's still possible that, like, by the end of the practice, that is what you've ended up doing, if that makes sense. But I'm not that experienced with metta.
Well, it could end up happening to you, right? That's back to the cultivation. Like, I like this cultivation, right? So in meditation, you're cultivating the field for a bunch of second order effects or something. I think that's an interesting way to frame it that might be really useful. And then the question would be, why do so many people that meditate not get what they want out of it or anything useful? Or, there's a bunch of ways we could slice that, right?
So-
They still have the profound event, and they still don't integrate.
Mark, you should know that the traditional way to talk about metta practice is with the phrase metta bhavana. And bhavana, one of the meanings of that word is it's translated as cultivation, as in growing a crop or something. So it is certainly a connection which is there.
And I guess we can kind of see this happening in Jules versus Voloskin's experience of witnessing versus, at least theoretically, entering into the mind of as just like two possible things that can spring up within this cultivation process.
I think a connection you can make to witnessing is the suchness, right? It's recognizing the specifics without impeding yourself between those your observation and the interpretation. And then the opposite thing would be like projecting that person into the future, right? Seeing the potential, and that would be the moreness then, right? And then the moreness, your understanding of the moreness can inform your observation, the suchness, and that's the cycle.
Yeah, Manuel, I like that. That sort of points to the reciprocal opening sort of mechanism that John's trying to create or whatever, or engender, I guess. So I didn't know that about cultivation, Ben. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I kind of figured it was in there, but all the words and the translations and, it takes somebody who studies that sort of stuff really well, like yourself, to go through that. I never had the patience. So I mean, that's good. Like we're seeing the same things. So that's really interesting. And I like what you said, Manuel, about the suchness is the witnessing, right? I think that's deeply true, right? And then the moreness is something like the opening, right? The possibility, the confrontation with potential, right? The unstuckness in time. I think all that's tied up in the moreness.
And that's also brought to mind the whole walking, like the walking with one foot being meditation, looking at the suchness, and the other foot being looking through the mourners. Like you're sort of replicating that.
Yeah, John talks a lot about the ecologies stacking, layering, and overlapping. Those are his three big things when he talks about ecologies and what makes good ecologies. Oh, and linking. Yeah, that was the other one. There's a linking in there too. Yeah, he talks a lot about that when he talks about the ecologies. So I don't know how well that comes out in the series, but when I've talked to him directly about ecologies, those are the words he emphasizes the most when we had our ecologies discussion, we'll say.
Yeah, I've heard him say it quite a few times.
What's the difference between stacking and layering in that description?
Yeah, I'm not really sure how John's making the specific distinction, but I think it's something like higher order practices versus that fit on top of, right, or fit below, versus an overlap, right, and sort of laying two things into one another, but that are at the same level, we'll say, of interaction or function or something.
Yeah, I like that. Those are the images that come to mind. One is like you're building a tower and you need the lower levels before it works. And the other is you have these two parts, these two lenses, one filters red, one filters blue. You stack them over the top of each other and see what you're left with.
I really should have recorded this.
I am.
You are. Brilliant.
Although it's a wonder how much of it will actually come through, given how many broken conversations we've had. So it seems like everybody's having issues.
Yes, it's very frustrating. You guys hear me?
Yeah.
So I wanted to take a slightly different tack on your initial proposition, which is the word reverence. Now, this might be more Manuel's game, so jump in, Manuel, please. But I'm trying to think of the root word there, and I'm wondering if verity or veritas has something to do with the center of that, something to do with truth. What does
I'm the one to
reverence?
ask about this.
You like
it's not.
etymology?
Yeah, I love my etymologies. It's I know it has not got anything to do with truth.
Okay.
Very stand in awe of fear, respect.
Thanks. Sort of like reverie. Okay, yeah, I get it. Okay, red herring.
Yeah, it's got something. It's got sort of similar roots to respect. Like that means to look back. And the vera is just sort of pay attention to instead of just look. So
It's very perspectival language.
is it? Not quite sure I can see. Yeah, maybe.
Well, there's definitely an element where there's a negation or designifying of the self. There, that is probably the main part of, right, like you're being put into contrast to something else, right, where the something else is determining you as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, because I guess I think of it as a, at least at the moment, the idea of ourselves is more of a suchness thing. It's what we are.
So I'm noticing we're coming up towards the end of our scheduled times. I'm wondering if people who are working on various projects would like to update the group about them or not.
Yeah, I asked people at the beginning if they wanted to, and
Oh yeah.
we didn't get anything. But yeah, if anyone didn't hear that, please.
Ben, I don't have an official project, but have something to share which is related.
Great.
Okay. A few of you, I think, in the room here, we're interacting with a chap from Britain who is a Quaker. And there was a very interesting discussion generating around it. And I just sort of dropped in on it and had been speaking the previous day with Manuel and Mark about Quakers and thought, oh, that's really interesting. And also thinking to myself, how can I serve into the community a little bit? So I've arranged with this chap, Simon is his name, to have a dialogos about Quakerism and how, from his perspective, I thought it'd be helpful for a lot of people. Can you all hear me, by the way?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I thought it'd be helpful because it's an attractive kind of community, but sort of mysterious to many people, including myself. So I thought, yeah, I'm going to arrange a dialogos with him. So trying to set it up for next week, maybe next Thursday, which would be 8 a.m. UK time. Unfortunately, there's no way for me to talk to the UK that's going to be happy for the North Americans, unfortunately. So I don't know how many people are going to jump on or not jump on. Either way, I just wanted to share that and hope that it's going to be useful. My position is going to be trying to relate as a Christian as well. How do we make sense of John's teaching? Like, and frankly, since he's betting on RTNAR as the way forward, why don't we take that seriously? What does that look like, taking it seriously? So I'll put that in the announcement as Manuel suggested, probably in the next couple of days. Thanks.
Could record, if possible, you could record that.
Yes, absolutely, we'll do. Good. Yeah.
Forward to that too. Thank you for putting it on.
Thanks, JB.
So yeah, like maybe focus on getting a little bit of structure going. So maybe get everybody up to date on what's still happening, where we intend to be going, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'll have to think that through. I guess the projects have sort of mainly fallen a bit flat at this point. I'm still doing my, like, I've shelved the perennial problems thing. I had a sort of sense of a broader definition of perennial problems that John uses that includes it but goes beyond it to things sort of like, oh, well, we all need to deal with death and interpersonal conflict and so on. Now I'm on practices, ecologies, like the whole practices thing, because I feel like it's more important. So yeah, we should maybe just have a session where we literally just talk about what kinds of projects we could take on. Although, to be honest, usually we go on for another about 40 minutes from here, so we could do it now, unless there's some problem with that.
Take the wheel.
Okay then. So we've got the RTNAR project. So far, the projects we've come up with are the perennial problems, again broader than John. Perennial needs, which are a more positive thing, which Shivarani took on. We had Struan on analysis of religions, but I don't think that has really gone anywhere just yet. Manus, I don't know if he's not here. He was doing like this thing of motivations, values, which I prefer to call temperaments. And Andrew L, alternative narrative construction. I'm not sure what that's about exactly. Oh, yeah, like seeing dialogos as a kind of narrative, which is Struan's idea. So, yeah, people can go ahead and field some ideas of what other projects to have.
Well, for my part, I would say that the analysis of religions, I think, was more Mark's idea than and that was because he was disputing some of my claims. The other project with respect to dialogos and narrative, I guess I'm sort of working on the background anyway, but it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
Well, John questions directly. Fallout. Video.
Do we have the? Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Do we have the problem defined sufficiently that we can start working on the problem itself?
Oh yes, that's a good point. Like all of these projects, we came to the conclusion on the first RTNAR meeting that we want to focus on problem definition. So we're not focusing so much on answers about what RTNAR is going to be like. We're focusing more on what problems we're going to be trying to solve with RTNAR.
Well, I think that ties into the question that I posed to you the other day, Velasquez, that I think this is actually a good time to put up, because if we the video series that John has started with Craig Enriquez, where they are talking about the hard problem of consciousness. And I think it's a good question to ask is exactly what is the hard problem of consciousness supposed to solve with respect to the meaning crisis? Like, why is this particular problem being included in the problem formulation? Should it be there in the first place? Anyway, so yeah, I don't expect anybody to have answers to that question at the top of it, but I think it's something that I would like to see being around a bit in a RTNAR discussion context.
I say, good idea. Because yeah, it's not entirely clear to me why it's relevant at all, to be honest.
Yeah.
The thing that comes...
I was just going to say, wraps off that one, Struan, although he's promised.
Sorry, say again.
Oh, I said John has not taken the wraps on the link between. He hasn't taken the wraps off. Link between the hard problem being quote unquote untangled and spirituality / meaning crisis. I think that's coming in this week and the week following, judging by the kind of promissory comments he's made.
Sorry, did you say the wraps off?
Taken the wraps off, like he hasn't revealed it, he's only kind of promised it.
Okay.
Oh, that's like gloves off, I assume.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with the term or the turn of phrase.
I don't know if that's Australian vernacular or not, but sort of like you're holding
like
something
it,
out,
yeah.
but you've got it. You've got
I
the
get
wrapping
the
on
idea
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, it just might save people work because I think he's adducing as usual, right?
Yeah, it'd be
Yeah, well,
interested to see what he is going to reveal. Though I kind of think part of it's already been laid out in the historical factors of the meaning crisis. Like, I think the hard problem of consciousness is very much trying to resolve the Descartesian Cartesian paradox of, are we enlightened or are we romantic? And if we can come up with a semi-enlightenment model that really does justice to consciousness, then that's addressing a historical factor at the very least.
So what you're suggesting is that the Cartesian dualism and the hard problem of consciousness that causes by when two people who operate on it, at least from an enlightenment perspective, they're the ones who have a problem. So with respect to the meaning crisis, it's only a meaning crisis problem if you are trying to argue for enlightenment, not romanticism. Do I understand you correctly?
Argue from enlightenment, but I feel like there was criticism of romanticism as well.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying so to rephrase what I'm saying is because the question initially was what does solving the hard problem of consciousness do for you? And then you gave me your answer, and so I'm rephrasing what you said, and I'm saying so what you're saying is like solving the hard problem of consciousness is useful if you're trying to argue for an enlightenment kind of position, as opposed to a romantic position. A romantic won't care about the distinction between solving the hard problem of consciousness is kind of useless to him. Like, would that be a valid inference to draw from what you're trying to say?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, like, I feel like there's a middle ground between the two where we still have souls, but we can make logical sense of the world. And I guess the hard problem of consciousness in that framing that you're putting is trying to reach that middle ground from the Enlightenment side. It's one of the angles on this meaning crisis.
Okay. Yeah, that's just, I mean,
but
that's certainly a plausible answer.
Yeah, that's just what jumps out. I'm super interested to hear what continues to be revealed, or like what other inputs people might come up with on their own.
Yeah, I think there was somebody else who wanted to say something. It was like lots of people talking at the same time there. Like a few minutes ago, though.
Well, I was gonna say that I don't really see the value of solving it. Unless the solution is so complicated that it's inaccessible for most people or something, right? It's like, well, it might help with constructing like the ecology, for example, right? Like if there's some profound insight in how we make connections or something that we can more efficiently make the connections with that knowledge. But yeah, I don't see any spiritual value in it. I don't know.
I can take a
that's
spec
kind of fair
if
enough.
you like.
Go for it. What were you going to say, Jules?
Got some Australian internet going on.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I've noticed what's happening is not your fault, Jarvis, but I've noticed every time your tile lights up, I get booted out. So I'll keep an eye on it. I could, not your fault, like I said. I could, you still hear me, guys?
Yeah.
And not over my laughter.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's incredibly frustrating. But I could take a stab at the connection that John's trying to go for using some of his words as to what the value might be. So the speculation I'd make is he's saying it connects ultimately to our capacity to do relevance realization. So how does that tie into spirituality? I'm guessing the way that it does is that he's going to replace. Can you still hear me, Manuel?
Yeah.
Yep.
So he's going to replace consciousness outside of the split from Descartes and onwards. He's going to replace it with fixing the nature problem. He's going to fix the function problem by casting it in the light of function of consciousness comes through relevance realization. What does it generate? It generates, that's the nature problem, and I'm very happy for people to take me to task here. It's highly speculative. But what does it generate? It generates relevance realization and religio. Religio is how we express spirituality. And so all we need to do is jump from the dualistic mind-body problem, smash it all together by adopting relevance realization model of consciousness. Something like that. I'm still coming across.
Yeah, it came through clear.
Oh,
Wait,
what do you think, Struan? I know you're very... Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Manuel.
Well, I was going to say that's not a statement you can easily reply to, right? Yes.
Oh, yeah, no, that's okay. The difference between kind of stunned silence and this thing is bloody kicking me off again, I can't tell.
Yeah, no, sorry, I kind of got distracted by a dog jumping on my lap, so I didn't catch all of that. I apologize.
Oh, that's cool. Story, Struan, and I am actually very interested in your opinion. Short story is my speculation is that Don will smash the problems which fall out of dualism, which are the function problem and the nature problem, by bringing it back to the function of consciousness is relevance realization. The generation of consciousness is primordially religio. Religio is the necessary outworking of our spirituality. We can't avoid it. Therefore, adopt relevance realization as the model for consciousness. That's what I'm guessing he's going to go for.
Just before spirituality, what did you say?
I think before that I said that he's going to talk about the nature problem and the function problem. So
and then you said the function problem, and you said the nature bit, and I didn't quite catch that part. So can you repeat that for me?
So he coordinates the word nature problem with generation problem. So he's interchanging those two. So he's sort of indicating
nature, generation, and religio.
Well, to answer the question, first of all, I am going to propose that what he does is he's going to say that the function of consciousness is to do relevance realization. The thing which consciousness generates is religio, and religio is, because it's necessary to being a cognitive agent, you can't avoid it, it is the house, if you will, for our spirituality. Did that?
Well, so if I understand you correctly, you're kind of saying that the consciousness generates religio, like that's structurally how it's.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nature.
I think I'd say. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
good to say that. Go on.
I don't know if Viveki will go down that path. It's an interesting idea.
Could be
I don't know if it's
wrong.
right, but I mean, it's not nonsense, you know. So it's.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's.
Let's invert it.
Well, how would you invert it then?
Well, the act of social behavior and having a dynamical relationship will generate consciousness, right? Like.
No, well, it depends. I don't think Viveki would say that. Like, it sounds to me like.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. But this religio idea that's worth thinking about. Especially, well, the question would be is like, how is it implies that there's something about the structure of consciousness and connectedness, that there is some kind of identity relationship between them in a deep sense.
Can you say that last part again, Struan, please?
If there's like a kind of a sort of an identity relationship between consciousness and connectedness, because religio is like it's the ligaments that bind, right? So the ligaments that bind are like the joinings, and so like consciousness. What you're saying is that the generation of consciousness, its fundamental structure, is this joining. It's
yes,
well,
that's very
that's how I read it.
Interesting idea. Yes, that's very good.
When I've thought about panpsychism, I've thought that it would have to be in the interactions where the consciousness is happening. Like the interactions of matter rather than the matter, necessarily.
So the relations, in other words.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
Yeah, that's spot on, Velasco. Sorry, Struan, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, well, I was just gonna say that the bindings and the connections and the relatedness, I mean, those are kind of this sort, at least conceptually.
So I'm gonna like blast this open. So I think, right, like what your brain does is necessarily imitation, not relation. And
so sorry.
And with the imitation, it is using an existing structure, right? So there's also a historical component that's limiting the imitation, and And in a sense, what you get necessarily is a reduced model of what is outside. And that's necessary dynamic because it always gets updated. Like, at least that's where my thought is going about what consciousness is, right? Like, so the consciousness is maybe another world projected by this world or something.
What my thinking is that, so what I was sort of getting at is that consciousness seems to happen when your neurons are interacting with each other. So they're having a relationship with each other. So all your thoughts aren't just any particular neuron doing something. It's neurons. It's the relationships that are happening between the firing of certain neurons. And also, sorry, just one more thing. It's I would say that imitation is gonna have something in there about relating to the world. But go on, Shiva.
Okay. So it sounds like, regardless of what the content of John's discussion about consciousness is, that the problem of consciousness is in fact relevant to RTNAR. So we're basically all going on, okay, so is I think consciousness is this, I think consciousness is this, but basically what it's coming down to is that, yes, the problem of consciousness is relevant to what we're discussing.
No.
No, but that's the question. Like it could just be a rabbit hole that we've all gone down that actually serves no purpose, and that actually the solution or the problem that we're facing is something completely unrelated to the hard problem of consciousness.
All right. In that case, I'll point out that consciousness is how we experience the world, and so if how we experience the world and why we experience the world is going to affect what we feel is meaningful.
Right.
So therefore, learning.
But we don't need a theory of consciousness for that. That's
okay. But but learning about why you have consciousness and how you have consciousness will affect what you feel is meaningful. So that's consciousness is how you experience the world. If you meditate and you're experiencing the world differently, then that affects how you see things, and that's going to affect your sense of meaning. Yes.
right, but that's already true without knowing what consciousness is.
Yeah, there's no. It's not obvious why you have to say any of that and the hard problem of consciousness together. Like they could be completely unrelated.
It could be completely unrelated, but if we can get a better idea, a better grasp of how and why we experience consciousness, that's going to affect the problem formulation, and it's going to affect the solutions which are available to us.
Yes, but okay, so there is the problem of the hard problem of consciousness, right? So there's a problem. I don't know how much effort we actually have to expend and what it will take to get the solution, because it's a hard problem. So maybe there will never be a solution to that problem.
Yeah, but any information we have towards that is going to be useful.
No, because it doesn't have to be useful, right? Like this is the problem with information, right? Like if you relate to the world, the useful things are the things that optimize your relationship to the world. And like me and Mark were talking about postmodernism, for example, and nihilism. They're like black holes, right? Like they're like pits that just suck you in, and they're not productive, right? So engaging with those ideas is just not going to resolve anything. It's not going to bring any fruit, right? It's not going to sow any fields. It's just going to suck energy. So it is not clear to me that dealing with consciousness is is fruitful in a pragmatic sense.
You're dealing with consciousness now. The way you experience the world is through consciousness.
Yes, but I have ways of dealing with consciousness without knowing the true nature of it.
No,
it's like you don't actually need to know how your car works to use your car. Like you don't learn how cars work.
Yes, but if you know how your car works, then you can solve problems related to your car better. We are talking about the meaning crisis, which is a problem that the consciousness has with a lack of meaning.
Right. Okay, so I
like
think
my
I can
foot doesn't care that there's no meaning.
Right, but I think I can make the metaphor meaningful here by saying it's not clear that knowing exactly how the car works is going to tell you where you want to go. Like it's not obvious, at least. If that is the claim that you want to make, or that anyone wants to make, I think an argument needs to be made in favor of it. You can't just assume that it is the case, that once you know how the car works, you're going to know where you want to go.
I'm not arguing that you all know. I'm arguing that this is information that affects how you think about things. And if you the meaning crisis is a problem with how you think about things.
Right, but more information is not always better. Like, this is relevance realization.
Right. It could be like you could be. It's like.
I'm not saying let's do some research. I'm saying let's listen to the research that John Viveki is doing and is making videos about.
Yeah, that's not dealing with the point, right? Like, when your conception of self gets more complex, you have more variables to relate to. That means your road is going to be more difficult because you're going to have to deal with more stuff.
Okay, but on the other hand, you're not dealing with an overly simplified version of self. If the self is too complex, then you can't solve the problem. If the self is too simplified, then the problem is meaningless.
It seems like there's an equivocation that's confusing this conversation. Between like having a fact known by a field versus like actively applying a fact in your life. When John and Greg try to solve the hard problem of consciousness, they're not trying to make you study the hard problem of consciousness. They're just trying to solve it to see what does come out of that. And I think like the field exploring things adjacent to the meaning crisis is definitely a different program to the program of like working out what individuals should do within the meaning crisis, but there's a higher order relation between those two. Helps resolve this conflict.
So my takeaway from the two videos between John and Greg was not that they're trying that the value doesn't come from actually solving the problem of consciousness, but from reframing how we think about the problem of consciousness. And for most people, it's going to be the reframing of the problem that actually brings value to their lives. And I think I agree with the people who say just having the information, more information, isn't necessarily going to help. Although I also agree that the information will have an effect. But I think the important part for actually where RTNAR fits in is that I think RTNAR is going to have to provide a reframing of the hard problem of the seeming duality between consciousness and physical material reality, whether or not it actually solves it.
Yes, it's sort of occurred to me that it might be part of rehoming us in the world, maybe.
It might be part of a narrative, maybe, at some time. But
Yeah, I'd say it's also the process metaphor or relation giving rise to consciousness is analogous to transjectivity being more fundamental than the schizophrenic split between subjectivity and objectivity that John often talks about, and that could fit into the narrative as well. And I think he's also trying to break down the simple dichotomy with the help of Greg having like the 3 or 4 different kinds of mind, like the self-conscious phenomenology and then the self-justification system, in order to problematize the idea of just consciousness being one thing.
When you say consciousness just being one thing, can you elaborate slightly what you mean by that idea?
Yeah, so I feel like most people have the idea that it's presumably from Descartes, where it's their sense of the ability to think and direct their attention, or some kind of combination of all those things, whereas Greg's model differentiated between the I can post a picture, but you had a nice picture of the lower left section of the internal state of like a different loops of information processing, and then one higher, which was a recursive sense of phenomenological self,
so
and then
you
at the
basically,
upper.
yeah, so you basically mean the idea that the mind is complex, not simple.
The lower one that I just mentioned, like component processing?
No, I mean in general, like the idea is that the mind is simple, not complex. It's like if your mind is complex and there's many parts working together. If it's simple, then there aren't really any parts, it's just a whole. Like the simple view of consciousness is that it's just this kind of self-contained whole.
Yeah, and I think
that's
related to John's critiques of like the simple ideas of panpsychism as well versus deep continuity. But I don't think they're trying to solve the hard problem, at least from what they've said, but try to like circle it and make it smaller, as far as I understood.
Well, fair enough.
But yeah, I liked the idea of religio giving rise to consciousness rather than vice versa, since that would kind of relate to the idea of transjectivity being the locus of meaning and maybe consciousness being like the ground of meaning in the first place, rather than the Cartesian dualism having the relation between
like,
things.
Hoffman's idea, that reality is an illusion, that matter is a derivative of consciousness in some sense. It's like, how does he put it? The matter is basically something that your consciousness interface generates in order to be able to interact with the world. Like, so the consciousness is logically prior to the matter.
Yeah, I mean, there's like the less radical interpretation of that, which is basically Kant's, that everything is filtered through our evolutionarily derived senses. But then there's also maybe the more extreme version of that, which is something like Whitehead's idea that process or the field is more fundamental than the particles themselves, which is, I assume, what Hoffman's getting at, kind of.
Well, no, I mean, Hoffman's actually quite interesting. But what I understand is like Hoffman has his own way of talking about the process and the substance, whatever you want. Like he has them both. He's not trying to shift off of the substance into process. He's I don't know, he's kind of speculative in the way that he thinks, right? He's kind of like, well, here, my ideas are very daring, but they're specific and they're testable, and that's good science, yada, 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 right? So he knows that he's making provocative statements, right? So, but from what I understand is like his idea of, like he's literally trying to reverse the idea of because most people, physicalists or whatever, they think, okay, you've got physics, and then physics somehow gives rise to consciousness. he inverts it. He says, okay, you've got consciousness, and then it somehow gives rise to physics. Like he's explicitly trying to make that argument. And well, I mean, he might be wrong, but it's a very interesting way of looking at it. So I mean, I really like Hoffman. Like,
yeah, I
just,
definitely like
some
John
people.
and Greg.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed them as well, but like, yeah, well, Hoffman is just, yeah, I don't know. There's something really elegant about the way he thinks.
Yeah, I agree.
But not too. Yeah, no. Greg and John are also. Well, I don't know Greg that well yet. I like quite a couple of the things. John, I like his discipline. Like, he strikes me as a very disciplined thinker. More like that's his most exceptional feature, I would say, in terms of his thinking. The discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of learned. I learned about. Well, I think I learned the value of that, or like at least the value of trying to emulate.
Yeah, I'd say humility as well, in my experience.
That's a dirty word in my lexicon.
That might be an interesting discussion. Weren't we kind of connecting humility to reverence earlier?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, I don't know. I think there's an equivocation going on because like there's humility versus pride and then humility versus hubris almost, right? And like pride is always, well, not always, but it's often seen as bad no matter what, right? But there's such a thing as taking pride in your work. And so there's like I don't know, like, I don't know, it's a really
maybe that's
issue
a misuse of the word pride.
No, I don't think so, because I think there is such a thing as taking pride in your work and being proud of who you are and being willing to stand up for yourself. And like, you can't just think that you're like the biggest shit in life. And there's something, there comes a point where humility is no longer honest. And like, no, if you are the best in the world at something, like you should be proud of it. Like you did something that is noteworthy. Like you're better than everybody else, even if it's only one thing, and like there's a million other things that people better other than you at, right? The one thing that you did that's significant and it should be recognized, and you should be able to say, if it's honest, if you actually have the results to back it up, it's like, well, I'm the best in the world at that. Like,
so
I
think I've resolved this issue. So there's a distinction between an act of will and an act of agency, right? And in some sense, you're not responsible for your capacities, right? Like the capacities are just there; they're available to you. So taking pride in that or whatever, I think is wrong, right? But when you're struggling, right, and you're having an act of will, right? Like maybe taking pride in that, but I don't know if I want to use the word pride there, but at least respect for that is important.
I also like to define the. I like having two words. I've noticed that we often use two words for the same virtue if you're thinking about it in Aristotelian terms. So humility is the virtue relative to hubris or arrogance. But obviously there's the other pole of basically hating yourself. And so relative to that, you might say confidence. So I understand.
Self-respect.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, to speak to Manuel's example, first of all, I don't buy the distinction between will and agency. I mean, that's like, what are you even talking about? But aside from that, it's like, okay, you are born with, let's say, the best abilities in the world. You say it's wrong to take pride in it. It's like, well, if you don't take pride in it, will you actually make the best of it? And my answer would be no. It's like the pride is the price you have to pay in order to bring it out the best that is possible of that talent or that natural ability, whatever.
You're making like 15 assumptions there that I'll disagree with, probably. Why would you have to make the best of that skill? Like, that's not a given at all.
No, but if you don't, then you're not taking advantage of whatever the natural capability is. So if it is some,
you are, right?
If
you're
the
doing
natural
relevance
talent
realization on it, and you're using it as much as is relevant. Like,
no, I don't think we're talking about the same thing.
I think one of the distinctions I would make between pride and arrogance, for example, would be you can take pride in your own skill, but acknowledging the other factors that weren't under your control that went into your capability to have that skill in the first place, even if one of those is genes, for example, like John often citing other researchers that he's collaborated with that, or people that you've stood on the shoulders of that have written previous topics before you without self-effacing your accomplishments.
I think it's as simple as you can't just call it a virtue to recognize your limits. You also need to recognize your power, your capacities.
Yeah, well, to use a practical example, as if you become a heart surgeon, you're the best, like taking pride in your abilities as a heart surgeon, like your manual dexterity, even if it's a natural born talent, the taking the pride in it is what's going to make you practice, is what's going to make you actually want to be the best, is going to make you put in the effort to be the best. Like, if you don't take pride in it, you wouldn't do that. So you don't necessarily want everybody to want to try to become a heart surgeon. But insofar as there is such a thing as a good heart surgeon, the best heart surgeons will be the ones who take pride in heart surgery, in their heart, or their capacity for heart surgery. Those that don't probably will neglect their art in some respect because they don't take it serious. That's my point. And as I was saying, obviously somebody can go and I'm the best heart surgeon, therefore, you should kiss my shoes every morning when I wake up. That would obviously be taking something too far. That's not quite what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I agree. It's one factor that would push people to get to the top of their capacities. Although I wonder whether it's possible for someone to have the locus of self that John talks about, getting rid of the self-conscious nattering nanny or whatever in the flow states, but you'd still have pride after the fact, I guess is what you're saying, to want to push you to get into that state again even better in your craft.
Yeah, well, I could certainly see how somebody who had a natural ability for something became narcissistic, and because of their narcissism, they're sitting there in the operating table and they think, oh, I'm such a great heart surgeon, look at me, da 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 da, and they're busy perforating the guy's heart in 10 different places because they aren't doing. Right? I could see that as well.
So, I think my objection to what you're trying to do, Struan, is that there's a whole set of other virtues who can also be used to explain that behavior and contextualize it, and I don't see why you would focus on pride as a primary way of analyzing that situation.
Well, it's just the word that comes to mind.
Yeah, I think it's one of the possible motivations, but they may also do it because they had, someone else that they loved that died from having a poor surgery, and they wanted to kind of make it up to that person, so it's not as egoic as maybe another person would. But I'm guessing you'd think that the more motivation types, maybe the more likely they would be to be at the best of their skill.
Yeah, well, if the only reason that people want to become heart surgeons, I don't know. It's all well and good for somebody to have had a family member who died tragically, and then for that to serve as an inspiration for somebody to never have somebody else suffer ever again. But I don't know if people are actually wired that way. I don't know if that's true of the average heart.
Right.
Or even the better ones on average.
But now we're in the realm of, well, necessary evil as opposed to goodness, right? Like.
Okay, well, I'm happy to argue that pride might be necessary.
It seems also like there might be a having mode thing here where like you're trying to describe something that might be called pride that is legitimate in the having mode of like reduce the number of people with heart problems, and in order to do that I need to become superior in my ability to like whereas like this humility discussion is trying to solve a problem in the being mode, and from that perspective I feel like you'd want both. You just want them in their proper place. But
I'm sorry, I obviously take no pride in my ability to pay attention because I was laughing too much at the fact that Jules is continuing bouncing out of the channel when you were talking.
And I wanted to say something to you. Can I say it now?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've thought about this tension myself quite a bit, and I think you'd find it helpful to do the dialogue between Aristotle and Aquinas on this very subject. So in Aristotle, he pays no mind to humility, and I think the Greeks in general didn't value it as a virtue, with probably the exception that they were always on the lookout for hubris. That being said, Aquinas did his Summa Theologicae, and he went through it as rigorously as you could possibly go, and he kind of tempered. So what you have in Aristotle's virtues is magnanimity, which I think literally translates as big-souledness. He or she who has a big soul. And I think it's roughly translated to, if you look into what he's saying it is good to be proud of your abilities and who you are. In fact, that's a virtue. And that didn't strike Christians. Well, it struck it as a conflict which needed resolution. And that's what Aquinas set himself toward in the Summa. I can't remember, I'm sorry, how he resolved it, but I think it was like basically something like the virtue of humility stops you from having the wrong impression of your abilities. In other words, it allows you to have the accurate assessment of what you are and what you can achieve.
Well, I think there is such a thing as understanding a limitation.
Right.
I wouldn't want to endorse a sense of pride was not understanding.
Say that last part?
I say I wouldn't want to endorse a sense of pride that wasn't that it wasn't mindful of your limitation.
Yeah, right. Because that wouldn't be skillful, would it? Going to your doctor analogy.
Like exactly. Like you wouldn't like that. That's not. Yeah, that's not the pride that gets you to be the best at what you are. It's not. It's not
right. But
it's not what you mean by when you try and take. Like if you take pride in your work, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Like that taking pride is also an awareness of your limitation.
Yes.
It really does. I really, really do feel like pride. The way that Struan's saying the word pride, I would prefer confidence. But the way you're using the word, the way you're using the word pride is literally the virtue relative to the deficiency, and humility is the virtue relative to the excess. But they're the same thing. It's about getting the right view of yourself, and that involves knowing your limitations and knowing your capabilities.
Yeah, and I'd put that under justice, actually.
But Wait, how so?
Well, justice is having the things be as they should, right?
As in not too much, not too little.
Well, yeah, but also that things come to expression in the way they're supposed to come into expression, right? Like that's the ancient
You're
idea
betraying
of
your
justice.
axial age heritage there, Manuel.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm hearing when you say pride. Is like, well, do things as they're supposed to be, right? Like, and then if
Yeah,
you're
I'm not. Sorry, I'm just teasing you. I'm not being critical, serious. No, I mean, I think that they. Yeah, I mean, at least historically, that was. I think there's a lot of legitimacy to that. That's how justice was seen, at least in the good old, the ancient days, not the medieval or the modern. So,
Just,
that ends my axial age remark.
Are we still recording, by the way? Have you stopped?
I can stop anytime. So.
Okay, so you're still going. But no, this is interesting, so may as well include it.
Don't everybody get all self-conscious at once now?
Huh.
Yeah, where's all that pride that you guys are speaking of? Like.
Yeah, you see, this is. I know what I lack, so.
So going back to projects, fully caught up with the RTNAR world. I'm not like fully participating yet, but I think like one thing on my mind looking forward is like a RTNAR analog to and to like art that people participate in.
Sorry, you cut out when you said the word.
Oh, liturgy, liturgical practice.
Oh yeah, I've had a thought about that.
Yeah, and I think a lot about video game design, which is kind of an abysmal mode of expression as it's currently used, but like that already has a participation built into it. But also like all of the existing art forms which have a place in religious traditions, but have like lost their religious connection in the modern world. It's something that I think deserves a lot of humility and like not underestimating the challenge of making spiritually profound art, but like I think that would be a very interesting like long-term goal of RTNAR.
I have actually been thinking about it. Like that's the main way I think about when I'm just thinking thoughts for the fun of it. I think about how video games would be possibly a superior way of transmitting a myth, because you are actually literally participating in it. You're actually involved in the myth. If you made a video game meant to transmit like a narrative or myth. So that's interesting.
So you're stepping on my project now.
Oops. Yeah. But I thought your games were like fucking D&D, which is like imagining shit.
Well,
but I mean,
I haven't foreclosed on anything, right? And the idea is to make as many as possible. But
yeah,
the distinction that I'd like to draw with the suggestion is that I don't want to look at them as liturgy. I want to look at them as tools for self-development. And part of that would be a concept that we call historical grounding, where you're contextualizing the experience of the person within themselves and their direct history and their more ancient history, and making that connection is something like narrativizing information in a way that grounds that person in at least in relationship to the game, but hopefully in a more permanent way to a meaningful thing.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. I'm super interested to see where that goes with both of you, and interested in like what discussions each of us might be able to have about these things, because they're exciting and very adjacent to things that I'm interested in.
Yeah, in my last conversation with John, I tried making an argument for the potentially video games as training in virtue through the combination of the appreciation for beauty along with the flow state induction. They're just often not used to that potential. And I trying to get in contact with Daniel Gregg, who I know is doing some kind of RPG as well, doing serious play. I don't know if anyone has familiarity with his project or is in contact with him, but I'm definitely interested in this because in the past, video games, I agree, have a lot of potential for creating a sacred space of perspectival and participatory, I guess you could say liturgy, maybe.
It would be liturgy if you're playing it together, I guess, because it's liturgy is people coming together for their spiritual practice.
So the biggest obstacle I see is that games have a tendency to be related to in the having mode, right? And that's even if you're in a flow state, right, like an addiction, right? Like I want to have the flow state. Like that's not a reverent way of engaging, right? So that's where I think this historical grounding stuff is necessary, because that's presupposed in reverence, I think. Like the fact that you have a way of contextualizing your experience and a way of relating to it that is more than just getting your fix.
Yeah, you'd need to have a very specific way of making sure that it's connecting to real life. Maybe bridging practice, don't know.
Yeah, this is something that I study a lot, like for the sake of game design on its own. So, to import some of the like game designers that I know like have things to say about addictive games versus more perspectival ways of playing. There's a lot that if you guys are considering these things, I'd love to import some of it to make it more accessible.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about this. So let's round it up, at least for the recording. So everybody, thanks for participating. We'll be having a new version of this next week at the same time, which is Fluskin.
It's 7 p.m. EST and midnight BST.
We're supposed to watch a video for that, I assume?
Yes.
And that will be broadcasted on the Discord. So,
yes.
Thanks for listening, everyone.